Good day. My name is John Heilman. I'm a member of the Wisconsin Collective for Comprehensive Assessment. I'm a professor at UW-Milwaukee and excited to be here with you for Module 1. So to give you an idea of what we'd like to talk about today, we're going to provide an overview of comprehensive evaluation. This will be a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover this semester. And we're going to do this by looking at two different types of assessments that we administer all the time. We do some assessments that look at very discrete, specific skills, and then we also look at assessments that examine more functional or academic performance. Our goal will be to show how value can be added when we administer each of these types of assessments. And then we'll conclude by discussing how these assessments can help us document the educational impact of a student's communication difficulties. Throughout our time with you, we will show you how our work as SLPs fits in within some of the broader DPI initiatives. Most of you are familiar with the College and Career Readiness IEP process. The DPI website has some great resources for the CCR IEP, which we'll draw from during our time with you. Personally, I really like the CCR IEP because it shows how assessment is a multi-step process. There's multiple goals that are best met by having a strong collaborative team. The CCR IEP, it reminds us that we want to understand our students' present level of functioning and their achievement. We need to have assessment tools that accurately determine if our students have a true disability. In addition to simply making disability determination, as school-based SLPs, we need to understand the nature of our students' difficulties and the impact that it has on functioning. Then we need to figure out how we can work together as a team to make these needs met. By the end of today's presentation, I hope that we can agree that we can meet these requirements with the tools available to us. Also, I think we will be able to agree that no single tool can meet all of these different goals, therefore the need for a comprehensive evaluation. So let's take a look at some of our assessment tools. We're fortunate to have so many fantastic assessment tools available to us. Through our time together, we're going to discuss different assessment techniques, and we're going to find ways of working them into our comprehensive evaluations. So today we're going to think about two types of skills that our assessments typically capture. Some of our assessments look at specific and discrete speech and language features. These are often taken outside of the communication context, but really hone in on different aspects of the speech and language. Other assessments look at more functional skills and typically provide a more direct examination of students' academic performance. So let's take a look at some of our assessments of discrete skills. When I say a discrete skill, I mean individual components of speech and language that work together to generate full spoken language. To me, this picture represents what we ask our students to do during our assessment sessions. Can you produce this particular phoneme? Can you comprehend this two-step direction? What about a three-step direction? Can you produce the different inflectional morphemes? How well do you understand and produce different types of words? So let's take a look at some of these tests. I thought I'd start with one of the first tests that most of us ever administered, the good old Goldman-Fristow test of articulation. Now, I just want to say, when I show a test throughout our time with you, it doesn't mean I'm endorsing the test. It doesn't mean this is a test that you should use. It doesn't mean this is a test that you shouldn't use. I'm simply using this to illustrate the point. So when we give the Goldman-Fristow, we're looking at a student's ability to produce each phoneme in a different word location. So we like it because it's quick and it's easy, and we can see which sounds students tend to have difficulty with. We can get a standard score to see how our students compare to their peers. However, when we're looking at these discrete individual phonemes, we do not learn a student's intelligibility. We do not learn how effectively our students can communicate. And we don't know if our students' speech sound profile relates to other areas of academic difficulties, such as reading. Another common task looking at discrete speech and language skills is asking students to produce inflectional morphemes. The example here shows a closed procedure from the test of language development where students are prompted to add the missing word. We can quickly see if they include or omit the target inflectional morpheme. For example, with number 10, we're looking for the past tense ED marker. Joel likes to cook every day. Yesterday, he, and we're looking for the child to produce cooked with the inclusion of that inflectional morpheme. Decades of research have shown that children whose zero-mark inflectional morphemes are more likely to have a language disorder. Well, I'm going to take a step back. The research says that this is a strong diagnostic marker for some children. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Let's switch gears a bit and take a look at some other types of assessments that examine students' more functional and academic performance and skills. When we do our comprehensive evaluations, the first step is to review existing data. I know that sometimes we just quickly review our students' file to get an idea of the types of speech and language assessments we're going to complete during our testing session. But we don't want to overlook the extremely valuable information available in this review. We can gain insight into how our students are functioning in the classroom and at school. On this slide, I took a screenshot of the Teaching Strategies Gold Assessment, which is used in many districts to track the academic functioning of early childhood students. At first glance, these types of academic monitoring systems might not look very pertinent to us as speech-language pathologists. The first items rate how students interact with peers and make friends, which may not sound very speech-language pathology, and is more in the realm of school psychologists, special educators, or school counselors. However, if our students with communication difficulties are having the inability to interact with their peers and make friends, that gives us tremendous insight into the impact of their communication difficulties. Similarly, with item 11, if we are observing substantial communication difficulties and our student has trouble attending, engaging, and showing flexibility, we may have greater insight into the root causes of these broader difficulties that our student is having. We can also collect a sample of a student's speech and language to see how they put it all together to tell stories, describe processes, and get their needs met. So what happens when they need to describe how photosynthesis works? Or for our younger students, how well do they participate during story time? In this picture, I have a copy of materials used to collect expository language samples. Language samples can give us direct insight into how our students are using their language to meet the different curricular needs. It can also be very powerful to look at a student's ability to learn speech and language. The graphic on the right side of this slide is from DPI's Dynamic Assessment resource. Dynamic assessment lets us see how students learn new material and how they can adapt their language skills with different levels of support. Dynamic assessment can help us identify if a student truly has communication difficulties and is truly eligible for services. It can also help us to identify strategies to support students. For example, how much support do they need to comprehend information that they hear in class? How much support do they need to express their ideas and meet the classroom requirements? On this slide, I took a screenshot of the student language scale, which is part of the test called the TILS. With this tool, teachers provide their insights into their students' communication ability. We can really see what the teachers are observing. This can help us in a lot of different ways. It can help us understand the impact of communication difficulties on classroom performance. These types of perspectives, they can also provide a more holistic view of a student's communication skills. And we get this view from an outside perspective, which helps us understand how our students are using their speech and language within the classroom. Okay, so now that we've looked at some of these different examples, let's make some comparisons between discrete skill assessments and more functional and academic assessments. First, our assessments that look at more discrete skills, they tend to focus on small chunks of speech and language. So for example, the Goldman-Fristow, that looked at individual phonemes. The test of language development, that looked at production of inflectional morphemes. Our examples of more functional and academic assessments focus less on discrete skills and more on our students' overall ability to communicate. With our review of existing data, we looked at different academic competencies and identified some of the major academic areas where our students might be falling behind. With a language sample, we can see how well our students use their language to convey a particular message. Was our student able to explain their favorite sport effectively? The final example of the dynamic assessment, that allowed us to observe how students can modify their speech and language to meet the needs of the communicator. Now, looking back at our assessments that look at discrete skills, we can see that they tend to be highly standardized. Every student names the same pictures on the Goldman-Fristow, and every student tries to produce the same inflectional morphemes on the told. Because they are highly standardized, they lend themselves well to norm referencing. We often get standard scores and percentiles, and this gives us the ability to quantify a student's performance and compare them to their peers and see their relative standing. Our more functional and academic assessments, on the other hand, are typically interpreted as meeting or not meeting a certain criterion. That's why these are often called criterion reference assessments. Is the student able to make friends and engage with peers? Are they able to tell good stories? Can they show good modifiability during a dynamic assessment? Now, we need to be aware that the tests of students' discrete skills, they tend to be more biased against students who are multilingual, speak certain dialects, have particular backgrounds or different experiences. This is going to be a theme throughout our time together. If the specific features in a given task are not familiar to the student, or if they don't have the existing knowledge, it's not going to give us true insight into their speech and language abilities. For example, tests examining zero marking of inflectional morphemes are of no use for students who speak African American English. Our more functional and academic assessments, while they can be biased, they tend to be less biased because we're looking more at holistic communication skills that are more universal across languages, dialects, backgrounds, and different cultures. Finally, when looking at the discrete skills in isolation, we have to make assumptions about how a student's academic functioning is impacted. Conversely, with our more functional and academic assessments, we're directly evaluating how the student is functioning academically. We don't have to assume that difficulties with a certain sound or a certain morpheme or a certain a set of skills relates to academic difficulties. We can observe those academic difficulties directly. So after looking at some examples and doing some comparisons, we see that certain types of assessments have certain strengths and add value. Others fill in the missing pieces. So let's take a look at some case studies and think through the value that different types of assessments add to our comprehensive evaluation. Let's start by assuming we're assessing a student in 4-year-old kindergarten. When looking at their discrete language skills, we see that they are zero marking inflectional morphemes. So for example, instead of saying she goes to the store, the student says she go to the store. We note that the student has good behavior and the teacher observes minimal disruptions in the class. We also observed in our language sample that the student has poor narrative organization skills, much lower than the other students in the class. So when we're trying to determine if the student has a significant discrepancy from his peers, we found that he scored considerably lower on his norm reference tests. Observing his poor narrative organization skills provides further evidence that there's a true language difficulty. We also have direct observation of our student's academic and functional performance. We see that he struggles with understanding and how to tell a story. We know that this will have a big impact given the prominence of narrative skills in the K-4 curriculum. So when we take this information and we design his IEP, we can draw on his strengths. Our collaboration with his teacher revealed that he gets along well with other kids in the classroom. He follows routines and his communication difficulties don't seem to cause him significant stress. Hopefully you can see how each of these different types of assessments add value to the comprehensive evaluation. Now, if I told you that the student spoke African American English, then we would have a completely different opinion of this combination of tests. Looking at his discrete production of inflectional morphemes would add no value to our assessment, and we'd want to find a tool that adds more value. In this particular case, I think a dynamic assessment would do a really nice job. Let's move on to a 4th grade student whose parents are concerned about her speech. Looking at her Goldman-Fristow scores, it does appear that there's a discrepancy between her performance and her peers. We further see that she is stimulable for sounds, is doing well academically, and uses her speech and language well. She loves participating in the junior forensics team, so there's no hesitation to get out there and communicate and engage with her peers. Together, each piece of data adds value, and we see that she would not be identified with a speech or language impairment and would not be eligible for speech and language services. Conversely, if she struggled with reading and expressing herself verbally, her articulation difficulties could be one of the root causes of her broader academic and social difficulties. The Goldman-Fristow alone, while it tells us about some of her speech skills, it does not provide this broader understanding. We need the multiple assessment pieces, each adding significant value to the comprehensive evaluation. Our final example is a 5th grade student with an intellectual disability. He completed a norm reference test, which included a sentence repetition subtest. He scored less than the first percentile on this test. We see he's having a lot of difficulty getting through the day. However, a dynamic assessment showed that he made substantial communication gains when using an AAC device. Now, in this example, I personally don't think this was the best assessment plan. I don't think the norm reference test really added any value. It showed that his language skills were substantially lower than his peers, which we knew before going into this evaluation. The test did not tell us how he's performing in the classroom and told us nothing about how we should design his IEP. That time and effort would have been better spent on other functional academic assessments that could help identify aspects of his communication that could help improve his functioning. As we went through these 3 different examples, I hope you could see how giving multiple assessments added value. Using converging evidence from multiple assessment tools helps us to accurately identify children with true disabilities and recognize the impact the communication difficulties have on the student. When we look at the guidance documents for speech and language, you can see the importance of getting these multiple viewpoints. All of the information that I showed you tracks very well onto our different types of guidance documents. You can also see that most of the assessments look at the more functional aspects of speech and language, and that we have the freedom to choose those assessments that will add the most value to our comprehensive evaluation. And here's another one of our guidance documents, and I really like this rubric from DPI. It also shows how multiple assessments can be interpreted and help us design accurate, impactful IEPs. The items outlined in red, those tend to be the more functional and academic assessments, while the speech and language norm reference tests and measurement outlined in blue tend to look at the more discrete skills. Now, one thing you're going to hear us talk a lot about in the coming months and 2 years is educational impact. When thinking about our comprehensive evaluations, we want to think about how we are assessing the impact of our students' communication difficulties. We work in schools, and we work with students who are struggling to access the curriculum and fully engage at school. We're charged with finding a way to improve their academic functioning, and we need to use the right kind of assessments to do so. Now, when thinking about our more discrete skill assessments and our more functional academic assessments, we want to think about how they assess educational impact. Now, on the left, what I'm showing here is, what we have to do when we look at discrete skills. We have to kind of cross our fingers and hope that they track onto academic outcomes. So, is there any academic standard that says that children must be able to repeat sentences with increasing length? No. Is next month's science unit focused on 2 to 4 step directions where students must point to pictures of varying sizes, shapes, and colors? The answer is no. There's typically no direct link between the discrete skills and our more norm-reference standardized assessments in the curriculum. Rather, we have to take a leap of faith and assume that difficulties observed on these tests will translate to difficulties in the classroom. Alternatively, our more functional academic assessments, they provide a direct link to the curriculum. When we get the teacher's opinion about a student's communication skills, we have a direct link to what is happening in the classroom. When we systematically analyze a child's ability to tell a story, we get a picture of how they are relating past events to their peers and teachers. So let's take a look at some academic outcomes and think about how each type of assessment may link to it. Now here's one of Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards, affectionately known as the WEMLs. Let's think about how our different assessments help us determine whether our student is meeting this standard. We're essentially looking to see if the child can take the listener's perspective and adjust their language appropriately. So let's think back to that TOLD subtest where we learned that our student was zero marking inflectional morphemes. You'll remember that he was not producing regular past tense ED. What does that tell us about conversational perspective taking? Not much, nothing directly at least. We have to make some leaps of faith. I suppose since he can't express past tense versus third person singular versus present progressive, it'll be hard for him to adjust his conversation based on when the events occurred. This is a somewhat reasonable connection, but honestly kind of a leap of faith. Alternatively, we can look at how the child does in an actual conversation. Is he able to stay on topic? Is he able to answer questions? Are his comments relevant? Is he using adequate and specific vocabulary? This type of assessment is much more closely aligned with this academic standard. We have more confidence in making the connection between the student's communication skills and any related educational impact. Let's move to a second grade English language arts standard. So this is looking at ability to understand and recount stories, so basically storytelling ability. So let's think of our student who had difficulty repeating sentences. This is probably related to the limited verbal working memory skills associated with language disorders. If a student can't repeat sentences well, we may assume that her ability to organize her thoughts and include necessary detail in stories would be impacted. But again, this is an assumption, and we don't know, A, if there is indeed a breakdown, and B, we don't have a deep understanding of how the student is performing and where supports may be helpful. Let's now assume that we completed a dynamic assessment, seeing how the student's writing performance improves with different levels of support. We may still see that the student has a true disorder, but we have more confidence that this is a communication difficulty with a clear link to academic performance. By understanding how the student's performance improves with different levels of support, we can understand the nature of her difficulties and design a more accurate type of support system to help her overcome her communication difficulties and improve her academic outcomes. So that concludes our content for today, and now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the application activity. We want you to start thinking about these different types of skills, these more discrete skills that we're assessing, and these more functional academic skills. Now let's start with something relatively straightforward. That's identify a student on your caseload. And when we're going to be doing these application activities, a lot of it would be a great fit for a student with language needs or phonological needs, but it could be any range of needs. But we want to think about a student where you're working on some sort of foundational skill. So something that doesn't have that clear link to the curriculum, more that discrete skill that's building a foundation so that a student can access the curriculum. So for example, it could be working on discrete phonological skills, a cycles approach. It could be working on some sort of foundational language skill. So looking at grammar or receptive language, things like that. Now in your learning log, we'd like for you to journal or describe or just share your theory of change on how these foundational skills will generalize to have an impact on that student's education. Right? So if we're working on, following multi-step directions and we're doing that in a fairly discrete way, doing activities in the speech room, how are we making the connection to see that that will generalize to have an educational impact? Now, one way we can do that is think about how we would measure that educational impact. It could be one of the types of examples we showed today. It could be language sample, dynamic assessment, curriculum-based assessment, academic standards, or it could just be anything that you think would show if that educational impact happened. Now, as part of the federal grant, the investment that the state is making in this project, your lead SLP and administrative team needs to track the percentage of SLPs in your district who completed these activities. We want to make it easy on everyone, so we're going to help track this information. So all you have to do is, after you view these videos and after you viewed this first video, is go to this Google form and answer a couple questions. Will take you less than a minute, and then we can have documentation of everyone who's completed this activity. Whoa, his floating head is back. We're just going to have our floating heads there in the beginning and the end so you can see us, but not to distract you when we're doing our content. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for your attention. We know that you're busy. We really look forward to taking this journey with you. We look forward to thinking more deeply about this content, about these topics, and sharing very rich conversations with you. We also look forward to learning from you about how we can make these practices work within the realities of a school district. So if you have any questions, any comments, you can contact anyone on your team. Your quickest responses are going to be coming from Alyssa or myself, John. So if you need anything, have any questions, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to help you in any way we can. Have a great day.